This workshop, like the ones previous to it, has been funded by the Australian Government Department of Employment and Workplace Relations through the Productivity Education and Training Fund grant program. So we are recording this session today. If you would like to ask any questions, you can do so in the chat, or you can wait until the end when we've stopped recording, or you can just interrupt me if you would prefer. So this morning we're going to cover off what are workplace delegates, what they do, as well as what the new rights and entitlements are and how to access those entitlements. And then we'll also cover off at the end the new right of entry permits for suspected underpayments. If you haven't been to one of these workshops before, we've done a couple previously. They will be available to view in the next week or so, and we have a couple more coming up after this one. These workshops have a disclaimer. The information provided is general in nature. We encourage you to seek specialist advice for your particular circumstances. And a bit of background on where this has all come from. So in December 2023, there were new rights and protections introduced for workplace delegates. The 1st of July 2024 awards new enterprise agreements and new workplace determinations to include a workplace delegate's rights term. So if you are covered by a modern award or you've recently negotiated an enterprise agreement, you'll find that there will be particular requirements around delegate rights. And then from the 26th of August last year, those workplace delegate rights have been extended to regulated workers. We'll talk a little bit more about what a regulated worker is shortly. So a workplace delegate is a worker. This is not a union official. They are elected or appointed to represent union members in their workplace. So you might know this term as a union rep, but they are one of your employees. They have the right to represent the industrial interests of their union members as well as potential members. That's anybody that's working in your workplace that would be covered by that particular union. And this includes just dealing with disputes between their employer or hirer, if we're talking about labour hire arrangement. So not to be confused with your the actual union official, somebody that's employed by a union. A delegate is somebody that is employed by your organisation. So delegates do a number of things, and really depending on your workplace culture and the relationship you have with the union, they can be quite advantageous to your business, because they are there to represent the workplace interests of union members and anyone else that could be a union member. And that can include facilitating consultation about major workplace changes to rosters or hours of work. They can also be involved in any resolution of disputes where it's appropriate. They might be involved in disciplinary processes. Very useful when it comes to enterprise bargaining, as they kind of tend to represent their unionised counterparts in the bargaining process, or any other process or procedure that you have in your organisation around an award or agreement or policy, where employees are entitled to have representation or that affects basically their industrial relations interests. So they do a whole range of things. Depending on the state, and in Tasmania, we do have HSRs, so health and safety representatives, which are people that are potentially been elected by their particular work group or the organisation to represent employee interests in relation to health and safety. So somebody could be a delegate without being a HSR, or they might be a HSR and a workplace delegate for the union as well. And they might participate in things like workplace health and safety committees or activities and groups. So this is very much a case-by-case basis. They don't have to be both, but some people might choose to be. And I've certainly worked with organisations where the workplace delegate has also been a HSR and represented the workforce on the Workplace Health and Safety Committee. So workplace delegates, they're entitled to the ability to have reasonable communication with union members and potential members about their workplace interests. So we can't really stifle their ability to do that. I would also say, though, that it needs to be within the bounds of your code of conduct or workplace requirements. We have had cases in the past where certain workplace delegates have been very motivated, shall we say, to the point where they've kind of been pestering people outside of work hours to join the union, or, you know, join some sort of dispute. I think it's important that we manage that. So if people are happy with that, that's fine. But also, employees in your workplace have the right to not engage with the workplace delegate if they choose not to. They should have access to the workplace and workplace facilities where available. So that's really dependent on the nature of your enterprise, how big your workplace is, how many resources you have available. If you know you're a 4-person workplace with a shared office space, then it's going to be very difficult to provide their own printer and photocopier and laptop. It might be sharing facilities, whereas if you're a larger organisation, then it would be expected that you would have more resources to be able to support that access to the workplace and facilities. And certain workplace delegates are entitled to paid time for training. Realistically, the major test here is whether or not your workplace is classified as a small business employer under the Fair Work Act. So that is if you have less than 15 employees, headcount, not FTEs. So this is just a clause that I've pulled out of the Clerks Private Sector Award to give you an example of what the entitlement to reasonable communication looks like. It's really about making sure we give them a little bit of time during work hours to be able to communicate with eligible employees, as long as they're communicating about appropriate industrial interests and those sorts of things. So a workplace delegate might communicate with eligible employees during work hours or work breaks or before and after work with the permission of those eligible employees or union members. So they can communicate in different ways. It might include face-to-face meetings or discussions. This is off the Fair Work information sheet about workplace delegates. You might give them the opportunity to post information on notice boards or use the work email system to share information. And as I said before, it could happen during work hours, on breaks, or outside of work hours within reason, because we also need to factor in that people have the right to disconnect. And I might not want to hear about my work-related things whilst I'm having dinner with my family. The access to the workplace and workplace facilities, as I said, this is where they are available and it's reasonable to provide them. So that might be a meeting space for the workplace delegate to hold meetings. It might be allowing them to use the work email, or maybe print some flyers or something along those lines from the workplace. But that's only a requirement where the employer has the facilities or the equipment and it's reasonable to provide them. So if we've got, I don't know, one printer and we're busy using that for workplace related purposes, and the workplace delegate wants to access that printer, then we would finish our work first and then make it available for them. We don't have to drop everything so that they can access those facilities. But I would also advise against not making it too difficult to access those facilities, because the better the relationship you have with your workplace delegates, the easier this stuff's going to be. I've worked in workplaces where there's been a very fractured relationship between the delegate and the employer, and it creates just a whole bunch of work because the delegate's misinterpreting everything or reacting to really small things and running off to the union, and then you're spending time defending yourself to the union. So I really do encourage you to try and have a positive relationship and support them to do this stuff where you can. That just makes it easier for you in the long run. So this one's out of the Hospitality Industry General Award. There are some slight changes depending on the award, but they basically say the same thing. So you've got to provide them with access to or use of the following facilities: a room or area to hold discussions, a physical or an electronic notice board. Doesn't really cost very much to go get a pin board from down at the local shiploads or reject shop. An electronic means of communication that you use in the workplace. So that's effectively giving them access to Wi-Fi and your work and their work email to be able to email people. Somewhere they can put their things that is secure. So a lockable filing cabinet or a drawer in a filing cabinet. And other facilities, including printers, scanners, and photocopiers. The other piece of equipment that we have supported a workplace to get for their workplace delegate, who was also a health and safety rep, was a digital camera. So that was a workplace where people weren't to be using their mobile phones in the workplace, but they were trying to report safety issues. So we bought them a cheap digital camera so that they could take photos of the things and use those photos alongside a hazard alert or an incident report or something like that. You're not required to provide access to or use of the facility if you don't have the facility. So very difficult to give them a meeting room if you don't have one. Or if it's due to operational requirements, it's impractical to provide access to or use of the facility at the time or in the way that they've sought it. So I don't know, they might want to use your boardroom when you've got a board meeting on, or they might want to access the facility outside of hours and there's issues around providing them out of hours access, something like that. And if you don't have access to the facility or you're not able to obtain access to the facility. So very neatly, as you would notice, highlighted the key pieces in that. But as I said, you will find a similar clause in all modern awards and all enterprise agreements that have been negotiated in the last kind of probably 18 months. If it's not in your enterprise agreement yet, I guarantee you it will be in the next round. So the other thing that delegates are entitled to is paid time for training. But as I said, that's only if you are a business with 15 or more employees, or if you are a regulated worker. So a regulated worker includes employee-like workers working in that sort of gig economy. So we're talking about Uber drivers and Uber Eats drivers, as well as regulated road transport workers. And as I said before, what's reasonable really depends on the size and the nature of the business, what resources you have available and what facilities you have available at your workplace. So if you've got a nice big boardroom or training room and you're not letting them use it, then you'll probably find that they're going to go and complain to either the union or Fair Work and you'll end up having to give it to them anyway. So much easier just to give it to them in the first place and negotiate with them around the times and days that would be most suitable for them to have access to that. So delegates access their paid training time by telling an employer in writing that they would like to do that. So there might be a workplace delegate training session coming up with the union. You have the right as the employer to ask for evidence that they are actually officially a workplace delegate, so evidence of their appointment from the union. And eligible delegates that wish to access their paid training time to attend relevant training have to give you at least 5 weeks notice of the training, as well as tell you what the topic, the dates and the start and finish times of that training is. If you had concerns about whether or not the training is appropriate or relevant training, then I would encourage you to seek a bit of advice around that. Probably a quick Google search, call the Workplace Relations Helpline, maybe give Fair Work a call. I wouldn't be refusing training without seeking some advice because, again, it's probably just going to mean that you're going to have to go back and forward multiple times with either the delegate or the union, and you may well end up having to send them to the training anyway. So this is the clause out of the Building and Construction General On-Site Award. So they can have up to 5 days of paid time during normal work hours for their initial training and at least 1 day each subsequent year to attend the training. And the ratio for workplace delegates is 1 to 50 employees, and that seemed to be fairly consistent through the awards that I reviewed when putting this together. And the workplace delegate must, within a week of that training, provide you with the evidence that would satisfy a reasonable person that they've gone to the training. So we don't want people booking into training, getting a paid day off and then deciding they're going to go to the beach or somewhere instead. So your obligations are that you need to notify the workplace delegate at least 2 weeks before the training if they can access that paid training time. I'd probably try and do it a bit quicker than that. If they're giving you 5 weeks notice, have a look and see whether or not you can release them and let them know. As I said, you can't reasonably refuse the delegate's request, but if the training falls at a time when you've got a bunch of people on leave or it's a peak time for your business, then you would be within your rights to say that it's not reasonable for the business at this point in time to send you, and here are the reasons why. However, we're happy for you to go to the next one or something like that. You can ask for an outline of the training content as well as evidence. And then depending on what award you're under, there might be slightly different conditions around the amount of paid training time that workplace delegates are able to access. So workplace delegates have a number of responsibilities as well. So they need to make sure that they fulfil their duties and obligations as a worker. So being a workplace delegate does not mean that the workplace policies and procedures don't apply to you. We've seen this a few times where people get these positions and start to act like they're untouchable because of being a delegate. Obviously, we need to be careful if there are issues with delegates. So if there's been a performance issue or an attitude issue and somebody's become a workplace delegate, you probably should have dealt with them before they became a delegate, because if you all of a sudden start to try and performance manage them once they have this title, it is absolutely going to look like you're treating them less fairly as a result of their position as a workplace delegate. So it's managing that balance between general protections, because we don't want it to look like we are treating someone less fairly because they've become a workplace delegate. So hopefully we've got good performance management processes in place already that are applied consistently. If there was a breach of a code of conduct or workplace health and safety or the use of ICT resources in the workplace, it would be standard practice to manage those, and it wouldn't look like we've singled out the delegate for breach of one of those policies. So it's that consistent application of our workplace policies and procedures is really important. So that if there is a breach, then we would manage that for a delegate the way that we would manage it for anyone else in the workplace. And the workplace delegate can't hold up or prevent people doing their jobs or workers exercising their right to freedom of association. So that might be my right to say, I'm actually not interested in the union, thanks very much, leave me alone. Or it might be the opposite, and it's like, can you tell me some more? But obviously, if we're in the middle of a job or doing something, we're not just going to stop work and start having a conversation about what benefits union membership might bring them. So effectively, they have the same responsibilities as every other employee in our workplace. There are some extra protections to prevent employers from taking adverse action against delegates because of their delegate role. So an employer must not unreasonably fail or refuse to deal with a workplace delegate, knowingly or recklessly make a false or misleading representation to a workplace delegate, or unreasonably hinder, obstruct or prevent a workplace delegate from exercising their rights under the Fair Work Act or under a Fair Work instrument such as an award or an enterprise agreement. So again, we treat them the same as we treat all of our other employees, and then we don't have a problem. So just some examples of adverse action for those of you that are not familiar with the term. It's where we are treating somebody less fairly than others as a result of them exercising a workplace right. So being a union member or being a workplace delegate is a workplace right. It is a protected right under the Fair Work Act. So we can't treat them less fairly as a result of that. And that includes doing, threatening or organising to fire or terminate a worker, injuring an employee during their employment, which doesn't mean, well, you can't assault an employee or hurt them physically, but it means not giving them legal entitlements. So legally injuring them, not physically injuring them, but both of those things are not acceptable. So by not giving them legal entitlements such as pay or leave, or changing their job to their disadvantage. So if you've changed their rosters to make their life more difficult, cut some hours or shifts or demoted them, you will absolutely find yourself dealing with the union and probably Fair Work if you can't resolve it. So courts can impose legal penalties on an employer who takes adverse action. The Fair Work Ombudsman can investigate allegations of adverse action or deal with disputes about the delegate's rights. So as I said, if you can foster a really good relationship with your workplace delegate, it sends a really good message. Where we don't have good relationships, the perception, particularly from the union, is that the employer doesn't like unions because they're trying to rip their employees off. And that's not always the reason why we don't like dealing with unions. Sometimes they're just difficult to deal with. But if you've got a bad relationship with your workplace delegate, you can guarantee that they're running back to the union to tell them every little thing that's not right about your workplace. And I've seen this happen. It can be really toxic. So wherever we can, we want to have really productive working relationships, because you're all on this webinar, which means that you care about making sure that you're compliant with your obligations as an employer. So we've got nothing to hide. So why not work with them and give them what they need to be able to do whatever they want to do? And then you can also use them because it facilitates really good consultation within the workplace. You've got a mechanism to say to your workplace delegate, hey, we want to introduce a drug and alcohol policy. What do you think about that? They'll go away, they'll go talk to the workplace and they'll come back and give you that feedback. So it can actually save you a little bit of time and energy. And maybe give you some feedback that results in a better policy or better decision for the workplace in the long run once they've undertaken that consultation with the team. Yeah, you've got somebody that's going to bring workplace issues to you, which allows you to take a more proactive stance. If you're working well with your workplace delegate, then it means that they might be coming to you with things before they actually reach a peak and become a big issue. As well as hopefully having a good relationship with your workplace delegate means that you'll have a better relationship with your union. And if you need to negotiate any type of enterprise agreement in the near future, then having a good relationship with the union will hopefully make that a slightly less stressful and time-consuming process for you. So, the last section that I wanted to cover off this morning is just some additional rights which really are centred around that new right of exemption, the new right of entry exemption certificate, just rolls off the tongue. So unions can go to Fair Work if they suspect that there's an underpayment happening with one of their members in your workplace. They can go to the Fair Work Commission and seek a waiver of the 24 hours notice requirement for entry and rock up to the workplace during work hours, of course, to gather records for their members to determine whether or not there's been an underpayment. And this right has actually existed in many state industrial systems for years, and it's not been used very frequently. If you're not underpaying the staff, it's not going to matter anyway because they're not going to have a problem. If you're not sure if you're underpaying your staff, I will direct you to last week's workshop, which will be available on our website soon, which was all about making sure that we are paying people correctly. But the whole idea of it is that if they've given a business 24 hours notice, then the business might get to work, I don't know, shredding records or deleting files or something. Whereas if there's no notice, then it means that the workplace can't do anything with the records before the union enters. And obviously, if they're coming without notice, then they can make those applications without including you, the employer, in those applications. So another good reason to make sure we're paying people correctly. Okay, so if you do get one of these permits and they're rocking up at your door, you need to be provided with a copy of that permit either before or as soon as practical after they enter the premises. They can only come into the workplace during work hours, and they're restricted to accessing their member records. So we did have a bit of a discussion about this around how we actually verify who their members are and who they're not if we as the employer don't know who union members are. I'm guessing that would be part of the permit process with Fair Work, that there would be a list of who's a current member of the union, and they would come with that list to access those member records. We cannot and they cannot intentionally hinder or obstruct anybody while exercising that right of entry. So we're not going to stop them. They can't get in anyone else's way. They can only use the information or the documents obtained related to fixing that underpayment. So they can't go looking for other things while they're in there. All they get access to is pay records, and they can only use those for the reason which they obtained the permit in the first place. They cannot enter any part of the premises that are used for residential purposes, and there are consequences for union officials that misuse their rights under those exemption certificates. So a couple of takeouts, just make sure that managers are aware of the workplace delegate rights and entitlements so that you don't have an issue happening that you're not aware of that could create a problem for you. Foster a good working relationship with workplace delegates and managers, and make sure that everybody's being paid correctly. As I said, see the previous workshop. There's a range of places that can help. Depending on what industry you're in, your industry sector may have workplace relations advice, which is industry specific, which can be super helpful. You can go to the Fair Work Ombudsman. You can come to us. That's our bread and butter. if you have less than 19 employees, we can help you for free at the moment with Employer of Choice Assist. And then the only other thing is, as this is a government funded service workshop thing, we just like to grab some feedback so that we can prove to the government we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So hopefully that was a lot of information, but hopefully it wasn't too much. I'm just going to stop the recording.